Okay, welcome everybody. Hi there, my name is Darren Calhoun. My pronouns are he, him, and I have the pleasure of serving alongside with Carrie and a number of other folks on the QCF board and staff with our monthly equity, diversity, and inclusion gatherings. This gathering is part of a multi-pronged effort for us to look at what does it mean for us to be an equitable, diverse, and inclusive community. These are values that are core to the QCF community. And we know that this doesn't happen by magic. One of the ways that we work on this is at the board level and on the staff level. We look at things like our budgets, look at things like our policies, our decisions, who's able to make decisions, how do those decisions get made, how do people get hired. We recently completed a very extensive analysis that you can check out on our website where we look at our internal systems for our community. So please feel free to look into that. And then we also have this community space. And it is just that it's a space for learning, it's a space for connection, it's a space for us to dive deep into these topics month after month. And so sometimes people jump in for a particular topic, other times people come anytime that we have the space, which is on the first Sundays of the month. And it's a space where we are learning, where we're welcoming each other. One of the things that my good friend Lynn Malone taught me is that when you're close enough to hug people, you're close enough to step on toes. And so we will talk about things and we will get into topics that aren't always comfortable and aren't always easy. But we really do believe that we grow together when we talk together. And so that's what this is. This is a space for us to do that. Tonight, we have a really wonderful guest who is going to help us look at the clobber passages, help us to look at these parts of scripture that have often been lobbied against the LGBTQ plus community. And then we will have times to talk about that in breakout groups. If you're watching this as a recording, we won't have a breakout group on the recording, but we do really invite you to join us as we dig into these topics, as we learn together, and as we see how we can be a better community to one another. So, without much further ado, I want to hand it over to Andy, who's gonna take us into our topic tonight.
Thanks, Darren. Thanks, Carrie. Welcome, everybody. Great to see you all. So many friends. I'm looking at all the names here. So many friends and a few new folks from places that I love as well, and some people from other countries. And so I'm just so happy to be here. Tonight, we're going to talk about how to confidently express our identity or identities. And we're going to talk about challenging texts in the Bible. And if you're somebody that has kind of gotten over the Bible as a book, we're gonna talk a little bit about why it's helpful to have a couple tools in your back pocket as well. And Also, how do we set ourselves up to be resilient in an era and a time when we're facing marginalization? Some of you are no stranger to that. I'd like to offer what I have to offer, and then also we're going to have some opportunities to share and learn from each other as well. So really looking forward to that. Um, I'm going to share. I'm going to go in and out of sharing slides tonight. Look at that kid. If you hadn't figured it out, that kid is me. I think that was my fifth grade school teacher or school photo. Couple things about this kid. First of all, this was, let's see, fourth and fifth grade was about 1980. Back in 1980, we used to get fun of for having a thing called a bowl cut. This is a great example of a bowl cut. Back in 1980, we also got made fun of for horn-rimmed glasses. Um, and uh, and Another thing we got made fun of for was having buck teeth. And so I had an overbite that I went into first grade with, um, and when I closed my mouth, my front two teeth hung out, stuck out of my mouth. And so when some of my colleagues say when they grew up they felt different, I felt different. And I felt different starting at a very young age. I remember in first grade, um, uh, I got glasses in first grade. And so back then, it was me and the teacher who had eyeglasses. And the eyeglasses made the headaches I was having go away, but they caused other headaches when when the kids would make fun of me, and it happened immediately. Um, I didn't know I didn't know what it was, and I didn't know this was happening, and I didn't know that it was not. Maybe I did realize it was not normal, but when I saw myself or when I thought about myself, I was afraid of other people seeing what I thought was the real me. Um, I was, I felt like a bundle of sticks that you would throw in the fireplace and burn to get rid of. That's what I felt like. And all through my young years and going into my old years, the strategy was keeping people from seeing the real person that I was. Because my belief deep down, deep-seated belief about myself was that that if you knew the truth about me, you'd know that I was pretty worthless. And um, and so I built facades around lots of things. And so the fact that a bundle of sticks that's tied together and thrown on a fire is the original definition of the word faggot, um, is coincidental because I never heard that word and thought it was about me. I bought my own lie that I was a straight guy with a couple of hiccups, and this lasted all the way into my mid 20s. Um, and when it came to my attention that that was possibly not true, um, I put myself through conversion therapy. So at this point, I was 27 years old. I had, while I had grown up in one of the most affirming and accepting Episcopal churches in the world, All Saints Church in Pasadena, um, I had gone across the freeway and joined an evangelical church that was one of the more conservative spots you could be. I was putting myself through Talbot Seminary and Biola University to get a master's in apologetics. That's one of I'm sure today it's rated one of the worst places to be if you're LGBTQ. And that was fine because I didn't think I was gay. I bought my own lie. And as a result, when I figured it out, like all these guys I'm seeing on the side probably means something's up. So I put myself through a couple years of reparative therapy with a conversion therapist. And so the question was, um, who do I see when I look at myself? And for years, I would look at pictures of me as a kid and cringe because I didn't like that kid and I didn't like the guy who I was looking in the mirror at. Um, what happened was through a process of so the conversion therapy this may come as a surprise to everybody here, but the conversion therapy did not work. And as it turns out, I am who I am. And so the next solution to my problem was heavy drinking. And that actually had a temporary impact of removing some of the pain. But at some point, what had become my best friend became my worst enemy. Uh, and I ended up in a position where I was in a 12-step program, and my sponsor said, "Andy, you're not straight." And I said, "No kidding." And he said, "But I got to hand it to you, man. You tried really hard." And um, so he said, if you don't figure this out, you're going to be back out there. So I don't know what to tell you other than you got to figure out how to be okay with yourself. And that's what started me down a course where I have learned to not only be okay with myself, but what I encourage people to do and what I've experienced myself is today I know the things about me that God loves. N Not just the way that I'm okay, or I look in the mirror and I think I'm okay, but I really see the things about me that God really appreciates. So, and I'm okay with the things that I'd rather change. I'm okay with the guy who shows up sometimes and I'm like, uh I'd rather not be that guy. So, I remember one time I pulled in front of somebody on the road. This is a terrible example because it's like driving. Yeah, everyone uses driving, but I pulled in front of someone in front of the road and I had really cut her off. And I wasn't thinking that I was cutting her off, but the next thing I know, I'm getting hand signals and horns. And I thought, I don't want to be that guy. So that was the beginning of my driving differently. And so there's a lot of those in my life. There's a lot of little things that I don't want to be that guy. And so I'm learning and I'm growing and all of that. And it doesn't bother me anymore. And it doesn't bother me to tell you about it anymore. And I love that place that I'm at. Really appreciate it. So that is a really quick story uh, for me. The first thing I'd like us to do is get together and have a conversation. I'd like to talk about our identity. There's certain parts of my identity that are hard to share. They're hard for me to express. They bring a little anxiety. When I moved to the Bay Area in San Francisco, I was afraid to tell people I was gay. Um, there are a lot of gay people up here, LGBTQ people up in San Francisco, but it was still uncomfortable for me, and it was mainly because of how I felt about myself. There are still parts of my identity that I find challenging to throw out in a group. Poly, they're not all of my LGBTQ friends are really cool or even understand this whole poly thing. And so when I lead with that, even when I tell you guys that, I don't feel as comfortable telling you that as I feel comfortable saying I went to college, something like that, right? So so one of the things that I'd like us to grow from tonight is identifying the parts of us that are ourselves, if we're willing, and it's an invitation to go into a breakout room and get to know each other a little bit on and the topic of we're going to go here and the topic is what parts of your identity are hard to share, um, and what parts and what makes that hard, what makes it difficult. um, so this is an invitation, it's not a requirement. And I'd like to invite you all to get what we can out of here. And I'd like to also invite you to be listening as much as possible rather than trying to plan through what you've got will come out when you have your chance to talk. But I'd really like you to hear the other people that are talking and really get an understanding of who else is in this breakout room with you. And then the last thing I'd like you to do, and we're going to have 10 minutes for this. So if you've got a little timer or something, please figure that out because 10 minutes is like going to be about 2 minutes per person. And that's a very short amount of time. So it's going to be a little bit of a challenge there, but I'd like somebody to volunteer to kind of speak the identities that you've heard. So you might hear transgender, you might hear lesbian, you might hear gay, you might hear neurodivergent. These are all, it's anything that you would like to share. Welcome back, everybody. I think we're all back. Um, and so I'm going to say thank you for indulging and having those conversations. What who would like to start with what they heard? Just some of the identities that we shared in our rooms.
In our room, we had transgender, consensual non-monogamy, queer and poly, and straight ally.
Thank you. Who else would like to go? Just jump in because I can't see people's hands.
I can go. Um, so we had asexual, blind, child of immigrants, genderqueer, sapphic, ADHD, widow, ally, first gen college, mother of trans man.
Who's next?
I can go. We had neurodivergent, trans, spiritual, um, non-binary, gender non-conforming, ace, mental health, adoptee, um, and I think that's almost all of them. Sorry if I missed anything. Group 3.
Beautiful. For those of you who don't have access to the chat, shout out to the neurospicy, neurodivergent friends in the room, ADHD diagnosed as an adult here. Who'd like to go next?
I can share for my group, and we had I didn't make a list, but I'm trying to remember. We had trans, asexual, intersex, Afro-Caribbean, parent of a queer child, um, recently going through a breakup. Um, and then we also had a general conversation, we didn't label it, but just about how labels kind of can create more barriers and the confusion that that actually creates for us, and wanting to respect that, but also understand how we feel about it.
Who would like to go next? I think we have two left.
I will quickly, our group, we talked about, I think, balancing your queer identity with Christianity, your relationship with Christianity in general, and that changing, just identity in general, that being fluid, and then lesbian.
Thank you. Thank you. I hope that you heard an identity that is close enough to yours that you can understand or relate to the kinds of things that are going on um, behind our eyeballs when we're trying to live and love in this world uh, with uh, with our diverse identities. Um, I hope it's my hope that listening and reading and talking makes you feel a little bit less alone, because the fact of the matter is that you are not alone. And here we all are. So thank you for thank you for going through that uh, and for you know the question I asked uh, Carrie and Darren in between was that too much of a question? And they said, "Oh no, we ask these questions all the time. This is par for the course." But to me, it can be a hard question to answer in a group of people who maybe you don't know everybody. So I really appreciate and thank you for leaning in on that. Um, the key question for tonight David Gushee, if any of you were at Q Christians conference in January, David Gushee was our last main speaker, and he talked a lot about how our community in the LGBTQ world is no stranger to marginalization and oppression. And, you know, the way I put this in perspective is, and these are hard truths to understand, but when my parents moved our family to California, California was just starting to end involuntary lobotomies for gay men. Tens of thousands of gay men in the 50s, 60s, and mostly 60s and very early 70s. One of the things, and I share that with people who don't understand things like, why is pride such a big deal, Andy? Why can't you just be yourself over there and not be so out there? Another story I like to tell is our president declared a national emergency when 54 people had died of COVID in America. But in the 1980s, when I was growing up, it wasn't until more than 20,000 mostly gay men had died of AIDS before our president even mentioned or uttered the word AIDS. And so when we think about how have we been marginalized, it's pretty recent history, and it's pretty significant. And I'm sure if I were to have another breakout session, we could talk about how we've been personally marginalized, and some of us would have some really significant stories, and others would have some really, really significant stories. So my question tonight is, how do we find the strength to resist? David Gushee was talking about the things that we might do and the things that might come our way that we might have to do. And my question tonight is, how do we prepare ourselves as LGBTQ Christians and their allies and their parents and their friends? How do we prepare ourselves for what may be coming? And the secondary question is, do we gain strength in resistance, or from that resistance? In other words, go do it and you'll find the strength. Or does resistance come from our strength? Do we use that strength in order to get to the resistance? And that question was rhetorical, so you probably figure out where I stand on that one. Okay, let's get to the next slide there. There we go. Of these four areas, we're really going to focus on two of them. And that's because I'm talking about the reason I'm saying responding to our marginalization is an inside job is finding that strength to approach and resist is really what I'm focused on tonight, and is really, I think, it's the first step. A friend of mine named Lily Zhang wrote a book called The Ethical Sellout. The Ethical Sellout was about people who had to not engage in the resistance because for a particular reason that Lily was examining, and she examined her own as an activist in the Bay Area, California. She was among, I believe, I can't remember the number, and it's horrible that I don't, but there was a number of students that blocked the San Mateo Bridge and made a human chain to demonstrate against the African American, Black American people who were shot, unarmed people who were shot by police. And she was arrested, and going to jail and being arrested took her out of the game because emotionally she couldn't handle it, and she had a hard time for over a year. She didn't do any more activism. And so she talked about the need for self-care and she felt like a sellout. And so how do we do that? How do we protect ourselves and show up and set ourselves up for success when we want to resist? Secondly, and we're going to talk about this first, how do we think about ourselves when our own faith attacks us? So we're going to start by talking about the Bible and the clobber passages, and we're going to get and that'll be our next exercise that we go through. How do we build ourselves up to live the gospel, and how we relate to others when they believe things like, one of the verses in the clobber passages is blah 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 blah. Don't be gay. Don't be homosexual. Well, actually, Romans 1:27 refers specifically to men sleeping with men. Those and then all those other folks we were talking about, including those men who sleep with men, deserve death. Next. So how do I deal with that when somebody believes that's how we should apply that passage or how we should believe that passage? So that is what I want to say about that slide. So here's the way we view the Bible. Here's one of the things I love about QCF. I'm going to give a little bit of a plug. Q Christian Fellowship is a place where everybody is. Everybody. There are people who believe that the Bible is the inerrant word of God and it is inspired by God, just the way any of the other fundamentalists or any, I won't say other fundamentalists believe, evangelicals believe, and they carry that belief with them. Some people believe that the Bible contains the word of God. Some people, we keep going down and down, and some people are like, hey, this book was used as a tool of oppression. It's always been a tool of oppression. It continues to be a tool of oppression, and we're out. And all of those people, if I took a poll around who's here tonight, I believe that we would find all of those views and a few others represented. So I want to acknowledge that and tell you that there is room at our table for everybody, and that's one of the things I love about Q Christian. And so as we go into our conversation tonight, it's helpful to recognize that not only where are we, but there are people around us who may be in different places. And it's important that we extend our love and our inclusion for everybody. So I'm going to talk about the Bible. And the reason I'm going to talk about the Bible is we get hung up on it. People who say, I'm not listening to that, they're not hung up on it, and they don't, the clobber passages don't become weapons against them because they're like, they've kind of gotten over it. But there are people around us, even if that's you, there's people around us who are still struggling with that. This is a message to the people who believe or are still struggling with, is being LGBTQ a sin? I'm going to just summarize my take on Hebrews 12. I'm doing some writing on that, and my next book is going to have a really good or a really in-depth view of Hebrews 10 through 12. Hebrews 12 talks about running our race, and at some point it says shaking off or shedding the sin that so easily ensnares. And people have said as a result, see, you don't just stop sinning before you run the race. But if you're honest about that kind of a view on sin, that person also probably believes that you're always sinning. So when do you get to run the race? My view on Hebrews 12 and the sin that so easily ensnares is, hey guys and gals and people, there's a lot of good out in the world that you could be doing right now. But instead, you're trying to figure out how not to be gay anymore. And you're paying a therapist every week to go in and beat your head against the wall to not be gay, instead of taking that same money because you walked past 5 people who were hungry and you could have bought them lunch. So that's what I think the sin that so easily ensnares is. Don't get caught up in it and don't keep it from letting you do the good that you're supposed to do or growing as a person. So that's what I believe we can adopt as a people who are wondering, am I sinning or not? And if I am sinning, how important is it that I not be sinning? I would encourage everybody to keep that front of mind, if that's you. Second problem that we've got to overcome. So much has been written. So much is being said. There are volumes and volumes and volumes about how to deal with these clobber passages. And if you're not familiar with the clobber passages are typically referenced as 6, sometimes 7, but mostly 6 passages in the Bible that people use to try to support the idea that it's not okay to maintain an LGBTQ identity. And so, and up at the top, Dan McClellan, he's been coming in my reels lately. And if you listen to this guy, he's got this idea that, he's got a podcast called Data Over Dogma. And he's got me believing that things about the Bible I never thought I'd ever be thinking. But Karen Keene is one of us and wrote a great book. I love Justin Lee. One of the reasons I love Justin Lee is that in our conversation, Justin is probably the most gracious, loving person in how he approaches people who disagree with him and us. And so I love that. Kathy Baldock has been a participant at Q Christian, and she is also involved in this 1946 film project. Her next book's coming out this summer, I believe, and it's called Forging a Sacred Weapon. And Matthew Vines, Colby Martin. So which one do you read? Which one do you use? How many do you have to read until you've got a handle on these 6 passages and how to respond to them? And I'm going to give you some clues. I'm not going to try to add my book to that list. In fact, I didn't. When I wrote in my book the chapter on what the Bible says, basically the chapter said, better minds than mine have attacked this. Here's why I think they should be listened to, and here's how they line up with this principle we call hermeneutics, which is the art and science of biblical interpretation. So I think there's great stuff out there, but man, how many books do you have to read before you can feel okay with yourself? And for every one of these books, there's 2 books that say they're wrong. So now what do you do? Well, what I recommend that we do is, here's what I recommend we do. First of all, we recognize that the clobber passages and understanding them can do more for us individually than it's going to do to help us win an argument with our family members. I had a boss, and the boss goes to a church where actually it was the church in a movie called Prayers for Bobby, and he goes to that church, and non-affirming Presbyterian church here in where I live, and so after he retired, we would get together for lunch, and we were going through Preston Sprinkle's new book, and he was trying to get to, well, neither of us admitted it, but we were both trying to get the other one to agree with the other. And after I think 3 or 4 lunches where we were just laying it out on the table, we both walked away, and I'll never forget this moment. I said, Dan, after these conversations with you, I feel stronger about what I believed when I walked in. And he said, Andy, I feel the same way. I feel more entrenched in my position as a non-affirming Christian. And I thought, wow, okay, there was a lot of learning out of that, that realization. But what did it do for me? It gave me more confidence. It gave me a better ability for me to shake off that sin that so easily ensnares and do the good that I ought to be doing, because I'm more confident that I'm okay. And so that's why I encourage this for you. If you are somebody that's struggling or that has those little voices that come in that say, yeah, what if you're wrong? Or if you have friends and acquaintances who do, pay attention to the next part that we're going to go through here. Here's a couple ground rules, and we're going to have another breakout here pretty quick. Here's a couple ground rules. And if you recognize the graphic, you are as old as I am. Okay, so that's a video game called Pitfall. It came with our first Atari 2700s or 2600s. It's not all these 6 passages are about pederasty. Secondly, it's not all about the fact that the word homosexuality was not used or homosexual was not in the Bible until 1946. Even the people from the 1946 Project agree with that statement. And the fact of the matter, if you're not familiar, the first time the word homosexual was in the Bible was 1946. The idea that Western white men rewrote the Bible may not be convincing. Because you can go to versions of the Bible and also beliefs that didn't happen and that sort of thing. So if you're trying to convince somebody else, that may not be a good position. And I would like to encourage everybody. The definition of a side B Christian is someone who identifies LGBTQ, but still believes that the traditional view of marriage, so one man, one woman, is still valid. And so they are typically practicing physical sexual celibacy in their journeys of faith, and they are members of our QCF community, and they're just as much members as anybody else. So I just wanted to call that out to say we have a big table here at QCF, and so let's keep I'd ask everyone to keep that in the back of their minds. So there's a few pages. You're going to get this on a PDF. There's a few bullet points here that that talk about these verses and possible explanations. So, like Sodom and Gomorrah, not representative of today's relationships. There are cultural stigmas surrounding sex acts. Sodom wasn't mentioned as a sexual issue until 400 CE. It really wasn't. Like right around the time of John Chrysostom was when Sodom, the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, stopped being about hospitality and started being about the fact that it was a same-sex interaction. And as a result of the fact that that why didn't I put this in here? I didn't put that it's not. It was the fact that sexual assault is not representative of today's relationships. I just didn't put sexual assault in there. Okay. And so as a result, Sodom's probably the weakest of all of these passages, and as a result, a lot of conservative apologists don't use Sodom and Gomorrah anymore. But you'd be surprised. I mean, you wouldn't be surprised that so many people, when they find out that I'm gay and Christian, they say, "Have you ever heard of Sodom?" And I'm like, okay. I mean, if you think that if you think that two men holding hands or two women holding hands walking down the street is the same as city-sponsored sexual assault, then my moral compass is not the one that's broken. You got to deal with your own. We get to Leviticus, a lot of explanations there. Like I said, y'all are going to get a copy of this. The word abomination, we look at it and it really means something that's icky. It doesn't really, and it's more of a cultural thing than an eternal abomination against God for all eternity. Looking at the context of Leviticus, the rules in Leviticus were to help a group of nomads settle around new neighbors and not become their neighbors. That's really what Leviticus was about. And then there's, as evidence of that, there's tons of instructions in Leviticus that Christians just don't follow. And I love the picture of this guy in a t-shirt. On the top, the back of the t-shirt says Jesus is king, and you see a row of a sleeve of tattoos going down his left arm. And Leviticus, I believe it's in Leviticus 29 or Leviticus chapter 19, that forbids tattoos. So we definitely are having double standards. I have a friend, he's actually an atheist. When somebody brings up Leviticus, he says, before we go any farther, I just want to ask you, do you eat bacon? And whoever that is usually says yes. And then my friend says, well, then let's never talk about this ever again. Romans 1:27, I've heard, is the most problematic, for a lot of us, the most problematic passage. I have asked some of the folks that were involved in the 1946 project what they believe, and the answer I got back was they believe that it best represents that Paul was talking about temple prostitution. But some people say, hey, look at what Paul is talking about in Romans 1. He's talking about, if you look at the context and you look before and after, these are people who have left God. They're chasing idols. They're doing idolatry. It's not about men sleeping with men. Colby Martin, in Colby Martin's book, Unclobber, talks about Paul making a false argument. So what he's really saying is, he's saying, sure, you folks are saying this, but I'm telling you something else. And so that's what Colby is positing there is happening. I think that's a really good way to look at this. It's hard. It was hard for me to wrap my arms around it, and it's hard for me to explain it quickly. And so that's where that argument, while it may be absolutely the truth, it's a little difficult for me. If you read the description, I know people who were scared by that verse, and then they read all of the horrible things that the people that verse is talking about do, hating God, hating parents, dishonest, stealing things, coveting. And you read that list and you're like, I don't think I've ever met anybody that's met all these horrible things that Paul's talking about, which makes me think that he was trying to make a point and not trying to set theology on sexuality at that point. That's just my own personal take. But that's Colby Martin's position, and he does a great job. His book's called Clobber. It's available out there. Most gay men are nothing like that description. Yeah. The next sentence, Romans 2:1. This is what I use. When the very next sentence, and the reason people don't read the next sentence is it's in the next chapter. So somebody hundreds of years later came up with these chapter numbers, and they split right in between ideas. But Romans 1:27 says bad things about you, Andy. And I'm like, did you read 2:1? It says, don't judge these people, for when you do, you commit the same things. And so that's the one I like to use, because when somebody's saying, Andy, you can't be gay, it says so in Romans 1, I'm like, well, when you say that, you are gay. Ta-da! Okay, so hey, why don't you stop being gay? And if you really think the Bible is the inerrant word of God, then deal with it. That doesn't usually sway opinion or change hearts, but it's fun to talk about. 1 Timothy 6:9-11 and 1 Corinthians 1:10, possible explanations. It's about pederasty. It's driven by cultural understanding. Okay, so there's two words. There's malakos and arsenokoitai, and malakos means soft. Arsenokoitai is a word that's a mashup between two words. It's male and bed put together. That word is not seen anywhere in any other Greek literature for a couple hundred years, until a couple hundred years after that is written in 1 Timothy and 1 Corinthians. So it's a word that Paul made up. And so what I like to do is say, you are telling me I'm going to hell because there's a mystery word. Like, nobody can honestly say that they know for sure what that word actually means. They can come up with great theories and understandable, hypotheses, but if they tell you they know what that word means, they're full of it. I heard one evangelical professor who said, he said in a podcast, he said, well, what Paul was thinking when he put this down. And I'm thinking, and I'm like, okay, so you understand what the word means, and you know what was going on in Paul's thoughts. That is one heck of a claim. So yeah, you can't condemn me with a mystery word is my favorite place to go on these. But a lot of people think it's about temple prostitution or pederasty. Could be about this process of men taking boys against their will, which means that it's not what we do today. It's not what my relationship with my boyfriend looks like. So that's 1 Corinthians. So before we go any farther, we've got 22 minutes left, Carrie. So I am slow, or I talk too much. So here's what I'd like to do. I would like to have us say this in the big room that we're in right now, so that we don't take 10 minutes out, because the next part I'm really committed to giving, and I don't want to shortchange you guys. Darren says, in the chat, biblical Uno reverse card. That's right. Or in the Mad Magazine card game, it's what me worry, you worry. Uh, for those of you who are, again, as old as me. Okay, so let's talk about what your favorite ways, if you had one sentence, and the goal here is to have one or two sentences and to, and it has to be memorable. It has to be rock solid. Like you can't like poke easy holes in it. And yeah, those two criteria. What do you guys think is the best way to approach Genesis and the story of Sodom and Gomorrah? You are now welcome to come off mute and just blurt it out. One or two sentences, simple, easy to follow, and pretty rock solid. Hard to argue with.
So from the cross-reference, I believe it's in Ezekiel, it's an abomination to not care for the poor when you have resources.
Yep. So Sodom and Gomorrah was, the reason Sodom was condemned was how it treated the poor and these visitors, and they were just going to victimize the visitors. So that is a good way. Ezekiel doesn't say it's about homosexuality. You could say Sodom and Gomorrah is mentioned 45 times in scripture and homosexuality is never once brought up. You could say that. So that's a good one. I have a hard time saying a city organizing mass sexual assault against two strangers is not the relationship I have with my boyfriend. I have a hard time saying that because it brings up, like, we had to have a trigger warning about this group tonight because that's what I was going to say. So that's the only reason why, and I use stronger language that I don't use in this setting when I'm talking to myself. But that is the argument that I use with myself to tell me that Genesis doesn't apply to me. If you're interested in that, I've got a blog post on my website, which is triedtobestraight.com. And that it goes into the history of Sodom and why it's about taking care of the poor more than anything else. And when you look at the history of that town and what they did, you'll be like, oh yeah, they were horrible. Like, it's not, when I say hospitality, it's like, really, hospitality? But yeah, look that up and check it out. Okay, we're going to go to the next verse. So the goal here is when somebody says, have you ever heard of Sodom? You think that one or two sentences that work for you. See, this is why I'm asking you guys, because it's got to work for you. You've got to, just because Andy thinks it's convincing doesn't help you. You got to be convinced. And so what I'm asking you to do here is pick an argument, and it doesn't have to be one that's on the sheet, but it just needs to be one that works for you, that you're solid with. Okay, so let's go to Leviticus 18 and 20. Who has a one sentence there? Christians don't follow Leviticus. I did a YouTube about that.
Are you
Go ahead.
wearing a fabric blend?
I personally am right now. I am wearing a blended fabric. There's a rant in West Wing, the TV show West Wing. You can find it on YouTube, where he goes through. He's got a Dr. Laura character in the room, and he just goes off on this. I want to sell my daughters into slavery. What do you think would be a good price? Because he references the Bible verse about it, and he's really talking about all the Old Testament verses that we just don't. They cause us problems if we try to follow them all. Eating shrimp is an abomination. Yep, that's the that is the do you eat bacon argument, and do you eat shrimp is also a good one. So let's go to, because that's the other thing. We could look into the word toeva, which is what is translated abomination. We could look at the cultural significance and how that works and all that. But the next thing you know, we've got books. There's books written on this stuff. We need a one sentence thing that gets that thought out of our head that we know is solid and it sums it up and we've done the homework. And so this big roadblock that comes up in front of us just becomes a speed bump. You need to understand the Torah by understanding Judaism. And that is absolutely true. And recognizing our weaknesses here and is important in that. Romans 1:27. What do you guys like for Romans 1:27?
For Paul in general, I like to say Paul commanded you to greet one another with a holy kiss. So are you keeping that command literally?
Good point. So we don't follow Paul to the letter. Yeah. Yeah, the one, and like I said earlier, the one I personally use is the next sentence says, don't judge me. But who else has a sentence or two about Romans 1:27? An old Bible professor from one of the schools I went to, a very conservative school, he's not affirming. He's down to Romans 1. That's all he's got left is Romans 1. So if you're on the fence about being convinced by this, and that's okay. And of course, I'm going to include our side B siblings here. Side B siblings are like, yeah, we believe the traditional view of this, which is why no, actually, when I talked to my friend Lynn, she didn't, I don't know that she brought up Romans 1. She brought up Corinthians, 1 Corinthians and 1 Timothy. And I don't want to put words in people's mouths. So yeah, anyone else have a sentence or a thought on Romans 1? I don't worship idol. So there must be idols. That's what this is about, people who worship idols. So there must be a different reason that I'm queer. I took the liberty of saying queer instead of Q. I hope that's okay. Just curious, is the purpose of this exercise to defend ourselves against attacks that weaponize the clobber passages or to understand our justification of belonging in the body of Christ for ourselves? That's a great question. And I've got a couple others I have to read. But before I read those others, I say the answer is both. It is debilitating when you have no answer, when someone comes to you with an issue. And I believe that for us to be resilient against the marginalization that we face, some of the most significant marginalization that we can experience internally, comes from our faith as Christians. And so setting ourselves up so that we can get past that becomes really important, because there's a lot of good that we need to do in the world. I will say that my vision for LGBTQ people in Christianity is to show the rest of the world that we belong here through our love for each other and for our love for other people. So I think that anything that takes us out of that mode needs to be dealt with, and this is one of those things. With respect to the hard to translate word in 1 Timothy, but really all those clobber verses, one thing that is persuasive to me from having served on a jury determining conviction for aggravated assault is that in our legal proceedings, beyond a reasonable doubt is the standard to convict someone of aggravated assault and other crimes. Beyond a reasonable doubt is a high standard for conviction. Why wouldn't we exercise the same care in determining whether a person goes to hell or not? And in determining whether we have any right to determine that? Makes no sense whatsoever to me. I agree with you. It is if you're going to say that an entire group of people is going to hell, you should not do it using a mystery word. You should do it and the majority of the most accepted hermeneutic authors and theorists in the conservative Christian world would agree with that statement. They say we don't build theology based on guesses. That's a conservative Christian principle. So you're not bringing something new up to them. You're bringing something that they should be well aware of. Okay, we're going to move on because I got 10 minutes left. One of the things, I have a friend in Q Christian. Her name is Lynn. We email back and forth. And Lynn is side B. And because she is publicly on podcasts and all that, I can say that I can, I'm just, yeah, I can just say, I can share this and it doesn't have to stay within our walls here because she's publicly made every statement that I'm about to make. She said in her email, she referred to my position as a revisionist position, and that stung. And I thought, I'm under attack. I wasn't under attack. She's right. My position is a revisionist position, and I need to figure out how to be okay with that. And the way I figure out how to be okay with the fact that in 2024, and of course we started earlier, but almost 2,000 years later, we're saying, no, it's actually okay to be LGBTQ. Well, why did it take you so long to figure it out? And I have to say that Frederick Douglass was a representative of the abolitionist movement. From a theological standpoint, the abolitionist movement had to overcome the traditional biblical view that it's okay to own slaves and that owning people as property was okay. And that's what they had to overcome. That was the revisionist movement in the 1800s. I think it was the 1600s or the 1500s, Galileo was a revisionist because he said that the earth wasn't at the center of the universe and it actually was moving. David Gushee in his work has identified the fact that the conservative Christian movement has changed their anti-Semitic position significantly over the last 100 years. And that was revisionist. Not villainizing Jewish people as much as they used to was the result of revisionism. So get comfortable with being a revisionist. It's not necessarily a bad thing. That is my let's be revisionists. I have 8 minutes to tell you to be a cheerleader. James, we've thought of as a book that is a call to repentance. Typically, we think of James as, faith without works is dead. Can such a faith save a person? I want you to change your thinking about James, and I want you to see it as it was originally written. James was written to a group of oppressed Jewish Christians in the first century Jerusalem. They were marginalized, they were oppressed, even their own families became oppressor to them. As a result of the fact that their families were also part of the oppressing class, we have a lot in common as LGBTQ people with the audience that James wrote to. James was writing to a group of oppressed people and giving them instruction on how to resist, not making a theological treatise on who is saved and who's not. And so when James talks about the rich, and I've got the verse up on the screen, for the sun rises with its scorching heat and withers the field, its flower falls and its beauty perishes. It is the same way with the rich. In the midst of a busy life, they will wither away. That's James 1:11. The idea is, and rich in the first century, power bought money. Today, money buys power. But back in the first century, power bought money. And so when James is talking about the rich, he's talking about the powerful oppressors, not people in James's congregation. He's talking about the oppressors. He's encouraging his flock, because he was their pastor, that the rich, that God is on their side. That's his encouragement. Okay, next. I want to share with you a quote from the guy that baptized me at the Episcopal church I grew up in. And for those of you who can't read the screen, I'm going to read it out loud. This is by George Regas. We're frustrated by the hugeness of the challenges and the smallness of our resources, and yet we cannot afford the luxury of despair. The only way we're going to continue to be the strong hands of love and the compassionate heart of Jesus on the earth is to hold on to hope. It is the most powerful force in the world. I believe that James was written to be a source of hope. Hope that God is on our side, hope through encouragement that our persecution doesn't come from God, encouragement to have patience and to pray. Hope through our constructive actions. So the idea that faith alone is not going to get us through our oppression. Faith alone is not going to get us through our marginalization. Faith alone will not give us what we need as people. We need to do some good works too. Or if they treat you like a thief, it doesn't help if you're actually a thief. Like, it won't make matters any better. It will only make matters worse. That's what I think that James is saying. James emphasizes hope through unity probably more than anything else. Avoid favoritism. Stop judging each other. Don't tear each other down. And he's talking about how people in that congregation were not getting along. Be a peacemaker. We see this today as an opportunity in our queer Christian environments. We have begun the process of denominationalizing our movement. And we need to check that, I think, because I don't think we're strong enough to face the ongoing marginalization of our people if we divide over things like sexual ethics. So I want to say that my friend Lynn Malone is the leader of the Side B affinity group at QCF, typically at our conferences. I have been the leader this past year of the poly, non-monogamous affinity group. Lynn and I are friends. We have eaten together. We have worshiped together. And I think it's mostly her heart that gets us there. Our ability to have a big enough table so that we don't divide over things that we don't need to divide over has been a great strength of hers, and also as a great Christian and an example of love, and an example of what I appreciate about QCF, because it was QCF that brought us together. Unity and supporting our community is of the utmost importance right now, and the works that we need don't just come from "Don't be a thief." The works that we need, that I believe, and what I believe James is telling us, means that we need to get together and stay together, and find opportunities to practice that in community. And I'm going to go over 3 options here in a second. I'm going to read what James says about the oppressor. He wasn't writing to these people. They weren't reading this letter. This is what he says about the oppressor. Now listen, you rich people, you powerful oppressors. I put that in. Weep and wail because of the misery that is coming on you. Your wealth is rotted and moths have eaten your clothes. Your gold and silver are corroded. Their corrosion will testify against you and eat your flesh like fire. You have hoarded wealth in the last days. Look, the wages you failed to pay the workers who mowed your fields. Incidentally, those workers who mowed their fields are the members of James' church. They're crying out against you. The cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord Almighty. You have lived on the earth in luxury and self-indulgence. You have fattened yourselves in the day of slaughter. You have condemned and murdered the innocent one who was not opposing you. What I believe this tells us as LGBTQ Christians is that we don't have to worry so much about our oppressor right now. We need to get together and become unified and stay in unity so that we can resist when we know what we need to do and the time comes. I love Justin Lee's book called Talking Across the Divide. The thing that Justin Lee talks about in his book that struck me more than anything else, and it's a whole book, but what struck me more than anything else was he said, you're not prepared to have the conversation with the person on the other side of the table until you can tell their story with them as the protagonist and not the villain. Man, some of the Christian stuff that he tells me I have to do is hard. How do I tell their story with them as the protagonist, the main character, and not the villain? So I found that challenging myself, and I love how Justin operates. So I recommend the book. Centerpiece is a great organization for stuff going on. Reformation Project, if you're looking for really intense training on the clobber passages, they have formalized class schedules that go through. But I also want to plug Q Christian has community groups that are always meeting all year round. I am connected. I've been doing that for about, I think, 3 years now. And I love it. I love it. Like I look around this room tonight and I could probably find 15 people that I've been in community groups with. I love the community that I'm able to join when I'm a member of Q Christian Fellowship. And the last thing I'm going to say is this. We in unity need to support the organizations and the movements, both with our time and our labor, and for those of us who have it available with our funds, because they got to keep the lights on. And so if there's an organization that does the work that you find important, now's a really good time to evaluate your ability to contribute on all those levels. So that is my talk for tonight. Thank you all for joining, and I'm